Hey, everybody, and welcome to a very special edition of Rocksmith Encore. My name is Dan Amrick. I'm the community developer on behalf of Rocksmith. And if you're not familiar with Rocksmith Encore, it's our occasional show that we do here on Twitch. Once a month, we try to sort of cut loose and let the developers of Rocksmith talk about whatever it is that they want to talk about that we think that you might find interesting from a musical perspective. So we've done everything from musical history to instructional tips to a guitar show and tell is what we did last month. But this month comes from you, the watchers, because our audience said, you know, how come you guys have never had somebody like Travis Kindred do a bass special? And I said, no reason other than we just never got around to it. And so that sparked the flame. And so when we got off the air, I'm like, Travis, do you think that's something you want to do? Do you have time? And he goes, yeah, I can put something together. So, hey, that's what we're going to do. It's Travis Kindred, ladies and gentlemen.
Hello. It is me. I am here.
I don't hear your microphone, though.
Hello. I am but a specter.
There you are.
Oh, hello. Since I am here, I'm not back behind the wheels of steel helping with audio and video. So
everything's going wrong because Pody's in charge.
Pody's flying solo.
Yeah, Brian Pody is running the whole board himself. And so what we're going to do is take the next hour to talk about, honestly, I have no freaking idea. Part of the fun, it seems, of Rocksmith Encore has become, let's make Dan figure out what we're going to do on the fly.
Oh, yes.
Sam taught
Absolutely
me
necessary.
a guitar lesson basically in real time and just said, just bring a guitar and an open mind. And so everything that you see is new to me. I don't know what's going on, but I will be your envoy and try to ask the kind of questions that you might have for Travis about bass. Let's start, actually, can you tell us your history with bass? Because you kind of, you define yourself as a bassist.
Self-identified bassist.
Well, no, even that. But you also walk the walk. Like you play.
That was very clever.
Thank you. You walk the bass walk. You regularly play live in orchestras. You regularly play live in show orchestras as well. And then you have also built quite a few instruments, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So the long and short of it is, I started playing in high school. I started playing because a friend of mine in math class turned to me and said, "Hey, you should be in my band." And I was like, "Oh, cool. Yeah, that sounds fun." I was like, "What kind of music?" He was like, "It's metal." And I was like, "Oh, cool. So, like, what would I play?" And he was like, "Oh, you're going to play bass." And I was like, "Sweet." What's that?
You're very agreeable.
Well, I was like, cool, a friend, neat. And then, and I had no idea what a bass was. And he was like, it's a guitar with 4 strings. And I was like, well, that sounds easy. Little did I know.
Doesn't it?
Yeah, and so, I mean, I got my start, like I think a lot of people did, where I started with, like, a Metallica tab book.
Sure.
And just, trying to get as much of the like, metaliest licks I could. And failing miserably, constantly, just, trying to play these, like, we would host these garage shows, like literally like garage band. We'd open our friend's garage and I mean, we had no idea what we were doing. We had these like J.C. Penney amps that we would crank all the way up and just, because we're like, if you turn it all the way up, it's like it's got distortion. And then a friend of mine was like, "Oh, hey, like, I play bass too." And I was like, "Whoa, I had no idea that there were other people who played this instrument. I thought it was just me." And he was like, "Yeah, I play in the orchestra." And I was like, "Whoa, bass guitar in the orchestra." And sure enough, he was talking about Upright. It is, but like only in very, very specific
like Jesus Christ Superstars.
JCS is a great one. Musical theater is a great one. We'll get there in a moment.
Okay.
But yeah, so I just they were like, yeah, we need basses for the orchestra. We have extra basses. Like, come join us. And that's what I did. I learned how to read music. I got really into like 20th century music there. So by the time I was a sophomore in high school, I was not involved in music in any way whatsoever. By the time I graduated, I had taken every single music class that the entire school had to offer, and had also started like many bands, was in a ton of community orchestras, and also started doing musical theater. Musical theater has been a huge part of my life ever since. I love musical theater. It's totally my bag. And so into college, it's actually really interesting. I went to study bass, right? The electric bass. That was my instrument. I was going to be a bassist. And ended up playing tuba a lot. Ended up playing
as
a lot of
one
tuba.
does.
Yeah, like you do. And I wasn't getting a lot of gigs. I didn't really have much to say. I was really young, and I was really new to this whole like concept of being in a musical community. So I actually ended up like not doing very well at all. And in fact, for the first, 5 years of my 20s and late teens, I like dropped out of school maybe 3 or 4 different times.
Wow.
Yeah. And because I was just like, oh, I'm going to study music. And then I just wouldn't take other classes, or I'd skip my other classes because I wanted to go practice, or because, you know, whatever. And so I was like, okay, cool. I guess I'm not going to get a degree. I'm not going to learn music. I'm just going to, you know, I guess play with like bands. And so I would join these like, you know, rock bands. They were fine to play a gig every couple months, and that's cool. But yeah, I just didn't really play at all. And then I actually joined a drum corps, which is like a competitive marching ensemble, playing tuba, and doing these competitive marching things all across the states, going on tour and stuff. I did that for like 2 years, and then you age out, right? You get too old. And so I aged out, and I was like, oh,
it's
cool.
Like Menudo, but for tuba.
Exactly. Yeah. It's exactly the same
Menubo.
thing. Oh my goodness. But so what ended up happening is I learned this like this determination and like how to work hard on something I really wanted, how to focus. And I was like, cool. Well, I've got nothing else going on. I'm gonna go back to school. And then it was like 4 years later, I got my master's degree.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Yeah, because I was.
So you were like, okay, no, I figured it out now. Here we go, critical path.
Yeah. So I finished my undergrad when I was 26, and I finished my graduate when I was 28. Like
Good
it was
Lord.
just like I want this, you know.
Right.
And now like, you know, we're trying to figure out like what kind of PhD I'm gonna get, you know.
Nice.
Which would be really fun. But yeah, so I mean, it really was just like I want to play Cliff Burton bass lines to like I want to academically like lecture and teach about music, right? And that was my real.
That's quite a leap.
Yeah, exactly. And so along the way, I've developed all these great relationships with musicians, especially through musical theater, working with these great orchestral musicians who also play in rock bands, people who listen to, listen to like all the classic rock and then all the weird mathy rock and then also classical music and really like love to think about it and talk about it and play it, most importantly.
Right.
And that's why we started the Awesome Orchestra. You know, the Awesome Orchestra was an orchestra that started based on the premise of like, we all like being in bands and we all like playing in orchestra, but we don't really like being in orchestras. You know?
Right.
So like
as a full-time commitment kind of thing.
Well, you know, I mean, we do like playing in orchestras. It's not fair, but like, you know, like wearing a tux and all the sort of wrapping on it. Like we just want to play. We just want to like have some beers and hang out and play. So we're like, what if we built an orchestra in the same way you built a band?
Right.
And that's where that happened. And that's been a huge amount of like super fun stuff. You know, Sam has sung with us at the Fox in Oakland's big theater. And yeah, we've played for the Deer Hunter and a bunch of other like really great bands. Beats Antique, we were on one of their albums. And those are huge parts of my like past life too. Like these are bands that I loved. And it's like, oh my gosh, I'm recording on their albums, you know. And so yeah, I gig a lot. Like yeah, I do maybe like 9 to 13 musicals a year.
9 to 13.
Yeah, like
good.
So to be
good
fair,
odd
like
number.
each musical like runs like, you know, like 3 to 5 days a week for 3 to 6 weeks.
Right.
Like I recently did a show where I did 52 weeks with five shows a week, and still working a day job and then teaching on the side. But yeah, that's in a nutshell, I guess, my relationship to music and my relationship to bass in particular. Yeah, and the biggest thing has been like being able to play upright and electric is hugely important. It's changed like you get so much more work when you do both.
All right.
But yeah.
So here's what's going to happen today. Basically, whatever Travis wants to do. Our friend Black Widow is in our chat room. She is armed with codes in addition to trying to answer or document some of the questions that you might have. So as we go through, I'll keep an eye on that document that she is building for me so that I can see what you're asking as we go. Obviously, Travis has a lot of things that he wants to talk about, too, so we'll get to as many of those questions as we can when they make the most sense. But also, you do have a chance to win some DLC, and I specifically chose some stuff from our code archive for Steam of notable bass songs. So it's not just random like, whatever we have, because sometimes it is, but this time it's not. So there will be basically giveaways whenever Black Widow wants to give them, when she has time and when she has bandwidth. Look in our chat room for her to call for what you need to do to enter. It's pretty easy. But yeah, we'll give away some free music in addition to all of this free information. And suddenly something has grown on Travis. And I don't know what the hell that is.
This is my upright bass.
This is your upright bass. Did you build this one?
I didn't build it.
Okay,
Yeah,
but you have modified the hell out of it.
I have indeed. Yeah, what we like to say is like I've never built an instrument, but I've built every part of an instrument, right?
Okay.
Because working in repair, that's usually what you end up doing. But yeah, I've done a lot of modifications to this. So the backstory of like today's subject is like I had this whole plan where I was gonna bring in like 7 basses.
Yeah, he's like, I've got this and this, and I'm like, well, okay. I mean, if that's what you want to do, that's
I thought
cool.
it would be super fun to show you guys like all the different kinds of basses I have, because I have, you know, my whole thing is like I don't want 2 of the same bass. I don't need that. So I want a bass for every occasion, right?
I have 2 of the same guitar.
Yeah, no, that's okay. You know, you know, I've got like a 4-string jazz and a 5-string jazz. You know, that's about as close as they get. So I showed up here at the office last night at like 11:30 at night, spent an hour loading everything into the car, and I was so excited to like drop it all off at the office, because in San Francisco, driving from like across the bridge takes forever, and I don't have a car to do that. So it's not good. But yeah, my key card wouldn't open the door, so I couldn't get in, which is just awesome. So I had to take all my gear back home and drop it off. Luckily, I was playing a gig right down the street on Saturday and had already dropped off the upright.
Okay.
So what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk about the difference between an electric bass and an upright bass, and also talk about the construction and how sort of an upright bass is built.
All right.
Yeah, and also play a little bit, of course.
Yeah.
Okay?
That's fine.
Awesome. So the upright bass is very similar to the electric bass, right? You have 4 strings, and they're tuned exactly the same as a normal bass. So E, A, D, G, right? Just like you would expect. And so there are a few differences, however. Yeah, as you might be able to
Really?
see.
Because I'm wondering what they could possibly be.
So we have a head, a neck, a body. We have a bridge. We have saddles. We have everything that you would see on an electric bass. It's just all a little bit different. So instead of a headstock, we have what we call a peg box, right? So this is a box, right, that contains all the tuners. And for every other violin-style instrument, the violin, violoncello, you would have friction pegs. And so this part of the instrument is always referred to as the peg box.
Okay.
Now, because the electric or the upright bass has such heavy strings and they're under so much tension, friction pegs aren't reliable. They'll fly out. So you have to use tuning machines.
Which are geared.
Yeah. And so this is where the tuning machine for like electric instruments really sort of started, was with upright bass. Because even like as old as like metallurgy gets, you get worm gear tuning machines. And then you have a nut that is fashioned entirely out of ebony. You sometimes see them made out of rosewood, but it's not bone because it's huge. It's a big slug.
Oh, okay.
Slug
So
of wood.
it's just not practical to build it out of bone.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly. And then you have an ebony fingerboard. Ebony is a traditional wood. You sometimes see rosewood. You sometimes see a few other exotic woods, and you'll like very, very, very occasionally see maple. It's very rare.
Ebony's very dense and kind of hard to work with, right?
It is. It most certainly is. And I'll talk about that in just a moment because it's very interesting. But and then the strings go over the bridge, and the bridge is super cool because it's not glued on to the bass in any fashion. This is true for the violin, violoncello, and bass.
It's held on by string tension.
It's held on by string tension.
Wow, cool.
Yeah, and so you can actually move it around the top plate, and you can also adjust the angle and pitch. Now, one thing that basses have, a lot of basses have, and you don't see this on the other instruments, is you have these wheels here. These wheels are what are called adjustment wheels. And so these can help raise and lower the bridge, and they can also adjust the pitch and yaw of the bridge. That changes the string alignment.
Okay.
Which is super interesting. So for like, you know, a heavy gig where you're you know, doing a lot of fast walking, you want kind of a lower action.
Sure, because you got to move fast.
Right, but for a gig where you have like more bowed stuff, you want a little bit higher action. It gets a lot more sound out.
Okay.
And then that goes over to the tailpiece, which is down here, which you guys, there we go. The tailpiece here.
I was going to say, I'm afraid to touch it or else I'd offer to help lift it.
And then that loops around the end pin. And the end pin on this one is actually super interesting. So you'll see there's a normal pin, and then there's that angly bit down at the bottom.
Right.
So that angly bit I actually installed and made. It's called a lobbery. And what it does is it makes it so that instead of the bass wanting to sort of sit on its point and axis that way, and kind of go whichever way it sort of wants to, the La Bourrée sort of forces it to go into you no matter what. So no matter what, the bass is leaning into you. One teacher told me very wisely, you don't lean on the bass leans on you.
Okay, so this is comfort, or is this access?
It's both.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's a lot more comfortable. It's one of the reasons why I play sitting down. A lot of people play standing up, and you can do that with this as well. You can stand up and play just fine. But it's going to fall into you instead of falling away or falling into your hand or falling backwards.
Okay.
Which is super interesting. So what's really cool, and what I want to show you right now is like some of the work I would do as a luthier, right? So we have some slides queued up where I'm going to show you like how we deal with a fingerboard, how we fashion a nut, and what's inside the instrument, because it's super interesting.
Okay.
Okay, let's cue that up. Aha. So this, what you see is I'm holding up what's called a radius guide to the end of a fingerboard. Now the fingerboard has to have that curve, because if you don't have that curve, the bow is going to hit multiple different strings. The bow is a straight line,
right.
and then the strings are on a curve. In order to not hit every string when you bow, you need this radius. This is too flat. The board is too flat, so I need to shape that. So if you go to the next slide, and first you have to strap down the bass, because I'm going to work on this super hard, and it's gonna move all around. So I have to basically attach it by force to the table.
Okay.
And then we'll go to the next slide. And the first step is to sand it. So I sand down with various grits until I get to a pretty good, like not fine sand, but a pretty solid situation. And then we go to the next one. I use a block plane. So this will take off a large amount of wood. This really sort of gouges out a lot of the scoop that you need for the string to excite, and gets that shape down, that radius down. And then after the block plane, we go to the scraper plane. The scraper plane takes the blade, turns it up to 90 degrees, and turns it around. So you're cutting against the back of the blade, and it scrapes all of the little ridges you've made with the larger, deeper cut. And
okay.
I misspoke. You actually, after this step, sand, right? So it's coarse, fine, and then finest. And then the next step, after you've sanded, is, this is me working on a bass. This is, I'm wearing an apparatus that allows you to breathe air from behind your head.
So that you're not breathing in shavings of ebony?
Exactly. So that's the thing about ebony is toxic.
Oh, great.
Ebony dust is extremely toxic. One of the main reasons for that is because it's an equatorial wood, or an exotic wood. And what that means is that it grows along the equator, so it doesn't have a season.
Okay.
And that means it doesn't have any grain, right? It doesn't have
right.
winter and summer grain. And when we get back to the main shot, I'll show you that grain on my bass.
Sure.
And then you go to the next one, and we'll see there the radius is all done. You see how it totally matches the guide?
Yeah,
now
quite a bit more.
It's ready to be bowed. And then what we do is after we build that, I'm going to show you what's inside the instrument, which is really cool. So this is what is inside a bass.
Okay.
You see on the right side the post. That is a sound post. That is also not glued in. It's held in by friction, right? It has to be shaved to perfectly match the top and bottom of the instrument. And you see that sort of wooden bar on the top left?
Yeah.
That's called the bass bar, right? And it's not just because it's a bass. All string instruments from the sort of classical string family have one. They run alongside the what's called the bass side of the instrument, where the lower string is. And that's what keeps the top from collapsing under the weight of the strings.
Okay.
We'll go to the next one.
I have so many questions already.
Oh, I know. We're gonna blow through all this and
sure.
get all the questions done.
That's fine.
So now I'm gonna make a nut. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it from a reclaimed fingerboard. So this is actually a bit of fingerboard. Right now I'm cutting it down to size. We'll go to the next one. So now it's down to size. And now I'm going to trace a template on it. We'll go to the next one. And so I've illustrated here how much has to be removed, right? And so now I'm going to remove it. And there I have my
just that simple.
Yep. So I've used a bandsaw, and I've used a radial sander, and I've done all this work to get that basic shape. You can still see the lines there because I've left plenty of room. And then after this, what I'm going to do, this is it against the fingerboard, so you can see how much higher it is than the fingerboard. And then after that, I shape it. Right. So this is its first. This is its basic shape. there are no grooves, and I've buffered it, right? So I've buffed it really well, and I sanded it really fine, so it has that nice sheen. You don't have to go too fine because it's that luster goes away instantly. It's just gone soon. It's so fast. As soon as you touch it, it goes back to being kind of a more matte finish. And then I add the grooves, and that's sort of the finished product.
Okay.
Now what I do is I want to show you that sort of that top plate again that has that bass bar, and I'm going to show you a thing called the cleat. So if you look at this, you see that bass bar right there, right? We saw that in the inside shot. You see all those little squares? Those are called cleats, and what they are is they're so this top had been damaged, and those cleats get put in to repair broken, like basically a broken top.
Okay.
Whenever the wood splits like that, it's splitting along its grain. You use these as basically sutures to hold it back together.
Are these glued in place?
They are. They're fitted and glued. Everything here, even the bass bar, is fitted and glued. So that's perfect. And the cool thing about the cleat is, yeah, you can go to the main shot. So the grain of the wood goes like this, right? You see all these lines. All the light lines are summer grain. In the summer, it swells and grows really quickly, right? All of the dark lines are winter grain. The wood contracts and it gets harder, right? And that's why if you look at really worn wood, you'll see you'll be able to feel the ridging, right? That's because the summer grain will wear faster than the winter grain.
Interesting.
Yeah, right?
I never knew that was why.
Yeah, and so you'll get these cracks that run along the grain because wood wants to break along. Every single grain line is basically a potential fracture point.
Right.
And especially since you have so much tension here and here on the instrument, right on the bridge feet, you get a lot of cracks right there. And so what you do is you actually, the grain runs this way. You make sure the cleat runs against the grain. And that way it doesn't cause them both to crack. If you do them the same, they'll split together. So that's what holds all together. But yeah, so that's basically how you do that's a standard fingerboard dressing. Right.
Okay.
Yeah, it's that's a standard luthier job. You do like 1 or 2 of those a day, every day.
How are you not terrified to screw that up? Because it seems like it's a one and done kind of thing. Like you make one bad mistake, you have to basically build a brand new fretboard for that customer. Is that the case?
It can happen. Yeah, if you're too ambitious, I mean, especially
you're gouging that with a heavy planer.
So you're not taking. There are like kind of 2 schools on it, right? And I went too far into one once, and I paid dearly for it. You can take the first swipes with that block plane. You can make really deep, right? And you get it done really fast, but it's really choppy, and you have to go back and fix a lot of problems, and you run the risk of taking away too much material. Because not only do you need it to be round this way, it also has to be round this way.
Right.
And what's even more is that each string has its own amount of that scoop it needs. So every single bit of the so that scoop actually goes from shallow to deep this way across the instrument, which you do a lot of measuring. And so you can go really fast with that first plane and then try to kind of make up for it, but you're more than likely going to run into a problem because you're speeding through the job.
Right.
There's a saying, slow is steady and steady is fast. And so what I like to do is you go really slow and you just go like just little shavings at a time. Shave.
As a hairdresser friend once said, we can always take more off, but it's a bitch putting it back on. And that was the kind of thing. It's just better to go slow.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. We have tons of questions from people
Awesome.
out there, as well as from me. I'm going to be I'm going to try to make a link to what I know. I've seen the inside of acoustic guitars, and there's all this bracing on the top, and that's to help the top vibrate in a good way. There's no bracing.
Well, yes and
there's
no.
the cleats,
Well,
but
so
there's
the cleats are only there as a repair.
Right.
Yeah. So
I assumed from looking at an acoustic guitar that acoustic basses work the same way.
Right. So what's interesting is that the top plate does have a brace, and it's the bass bar.
Right.
It's a gigantic brace, but you have to also understand that for classical instruments, for the violin family in particular, the body of the instrument is really a speaker. Right. If you imagine that this is the cone, this is the box. Like the back and sides are the box, and that's one of the reasons why they're made out of 2 different types of wood. So, like the top is made out of spruce, which is a springy, resilient wood that's easy to vibrate, but is still strong under tension. And then the back and sides are traditionally made out of maple, which is extremely hard and very rigid. And this bass in particular is made out of willow, which is really I like. It has a slightly darker tone. But most of your vibratory production is coming from the top plate vibrating like crazy. So you have the bass bar. The sound post is also right here. It's underneath the treble foot. And what that does is that basically transfers the sound from the top plate into the back plate, which is basically your amplifier. So you get that resonance from the top plate, and it's amplified by the back plate.
And why wouldn't you glue that bass bar in place? Why does it have to be there for tension?
Bass bar is definitely
Sorry,
glued
the
in.
bass,
sound post.
The sound post, yes.
The sound post is not glued in because you need that to vibrate, right? You need that to vibrate with the top plate and the back plate. And if you glue it in, if the wood swells or contracts, it can cause a lot of damage.
Okay.
Right? Like especially in a more humid climate, like if you're on the East Coast, and especially if you're in New York, this is really common. You'll have your summer and your winter post. Right, and you'll have your luthier make one for each, because you have all these different types of wood and all these different cuts of wood, and depending on the humidity, they'll all compress and expand in different ways.
Okay,
and so you end up like I especially in repair, I've seen it happen where people come in, they're like, hey, I just got out of my car and I drove here from Arizona and the back fell off of my bass, just straight fell off, or it's just like pop, seam goes.
Right,
and that. Like if you glue in the sound post, it's going to take the wood with it.
Okay.
Right, instead of falling out, and it's not going to have that resonance you need in order to get the bass to really kind of sound out. One thing that's really cool, right, is that we don't use wood glue, we don't use super glue, we don't use epoxy when we're putting everything together. We use hide glue, right?
Okay.
Hide glue is made from animal hide,
right?
And it still is, right? The reason you do that is because all those other types of glue, when they harden, they form this extremely tight-knit, rigid structure, right? And that's what makes them strong, right? It's really hard to pull apart, like a diamond, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Hide glue hardens in this very kind of like crystalline, sort of like doesn't quite fit together way. And so what happens is the hide glue is not as strong as the wood. So if the wood needs to expand and release from itself, right, release from the bond, it'll break the glue before it breaks the wood.
Okay.
Yeah,
that makes some sense.
Which is clutch. Yeah.
All right. I have a couple of things, and some of these may be going back away, but is that a stand-up double bass, asks Comatose Vessel. Is this what you would call, because we've all heard that phrase, stand-up double bass. Does this qualify as that instrument, or is this a variation on that?
So it's a bit of a misnomer and also like a regional variance, right? So upright bass, stand-up bass, double bass, contrabass, bass violin, bass viol, bass, all mean the same thing.
Okay.
They're all correct, and there's no. You don't have to stand up to play a stand-up bass. You don't have to have two basses to have a double bass. Although I will say, I had a friend who was on tour, and in his riders had one double bass, and he showed up to his gig, and there were two electric basses there. And,
hey man, whatever you need to get the thing done.
Yeah, exactly. It was very funny. But yeah, it's they're all correct, and all the names are totally appropriate.
Okay. Actually, Royman wants to know. What's the quick rundown of the basses that you didn't bring today? Because he said, okay. I had seven basses.
Yeah. So the quick and dirty is it was going to be my upright, one of my electric upright basses, my fretless bass, my 5-string bass, my 6-string bass, my Rickenbacker that's signed by Jason Newsted.
Wow.
Yeah, and there's a very silly anecdote for that. And then my Ovation Magnum 1 that I got a couple years ago.
You've shown me that. These are also good candidates for a future show and tells.
Exactly.
So you may not have heard the end of these.
Yeah.
But
I definitely want to show them off because they're super weird and super fun.
I have a lot of weird things. This is one. Beatmaster 80 is actually asking something that I wondered, which is there an easy way to access the inside of the bass to exchange the post? If you have a summer and winter thing, how do you do this without just like it's not like there's a trap door on the back of the sucker.
There isn't. Although there is a type of bass that does have one, but it's for travel. Like the back opens up and you can fold the neck into it, but it's if you want to look up a Chadwick bass, they're okay. So what you do is you have a tool. It's called a sound post setter, and I was going to bring mine in, but it's locked in a theater. Of course it is. But what it is it's basically you can look up Soundpost Setter and find it right now. But it's on one end, it's got this sort of flower looking metal disc, and what that does is that allows you to go through the F hole and kind of wrap around the post and yank on it, and you can kind of move it or tap it and move it into place.
Okay.
And then the other side has this vertical blade. And what that allows you to do is when you want to put the post into the bass, you stab the post, and it's stuck on the setter. You slide it in through the F hole. You get it into the right spot, like the bottom in the right spot, and then you sort of use kind of one of these levers kind of action to stand it up. And then once it's freestanding, then you go back with the other side, you hook it, you kind of pull it into place, and then you're tapping the ever-loving
I was going to say, so then
yeah.
it's just like you just have to wedge it in there and go, oh, it's not there, it's not there, it's not there. How do you know when it's there?
Okay, so
is there an indentation in there? So that
well, there are, but they're usually wrong.
Great.
They can be moved. So you can move the sound post to actually get different sound as well, because if you move the sound post a little bit further away from the bridge, the top will get closer to the back, right? It'll collapse more,
right?
Because it's being supported less. If you get it closer to the bridge, it'll expand up more. But when you have more flexibility, you tend to get a richer sound, but it's quieter. When you have more rigidity, you tend to have a weaker sound, but it's louder, like a less full sound, I want to say. Yeah, so the quick and dirty is like you measure the bridge foot, you measure the legs, right? Not the little swoops, just the legs. You get the sound post just in line with that, and you put it 18 millimeters away from the bridge foot towards the end block, towards the tailpiece. And that's where the top should be. And then you just align the bottom with everything else in the bass. So you have these corners that you can see from the F hole, and you can line them up and make sure they're aligned up. And you usually have the end pinned out as well, so you can look through the end pin hole and make sure it's all aligned. And then you're just fiddling with it. And the best part is you want to make sure that those like you have these two angles like this, and you need to make sure that that post fits. But you can't actually measure it. You can't get like a little measuring tape in there. So you just have to eyeball it. And it just
old world craftsmanship.
It took me a solid like 13 or 14 months to like do a post and not screw it up.
Okay.
Yeah, and I was doing them constantly. Like it was like the bane of my existence.
Wow.
Yeah, it's. I mean, once you get it, you feel real cool. You're like, yeah, nailed it. And the guys on the East Coast are crazy because they do tons of that all year.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Is there another question?
There's a couple of other questions,
Sure.
but they're more about Rocksmith and playing bass in Rocksmith, or
we'll get there
transitioning, from talking about the differences between different kinds of bass guitars.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to stop you if you have other stuff that's sort of on your current.
The only thing I was gonna go over. Was
Brian, the voice of Brian Pody has one.
It is me. A couple people have asked how much the strings cost.
Oh yeah, okay. So that I will tell you that. So normally, right, a set of strings for an upright bass, especially these, you can tell a string what kind of string it is by the wrap on the bottom. That's how you tell bass and violin strings apart. Yeah. So these have an orange wrap, and so that signifies them as bel cantos. Right, which is a type of string.
What I thought
from Tomastic, which is the
is
string
it a brand or is it a style of construction?
It's a model within a brand. The brand is Tomastic.
Okay,
and I think they also make electric strings. But
they do.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I recognize the name.
But they make a lot of they make like the most bass strings. But they also make strings for other members of the violin family. But they normally cost for a set for a normal 4-string like tuned to EADG. Is about $198 to $230. But I have a special thing on my bass, which you may have noticed, which is this. I
was hoping you would get to that. Yes.
Yeah. So this is called a low C extension. So normally on your bass you have make sure I'm not muted. Your low E. But when you open the extension, you got that low C. I can't sing it. And so the low C set is significantly more expensive.
Okay.
So this set of strings is $315.
All right. Woo.
Yeah, for 4 strings.
I have bought guitars for less than $315.
Yeah. Now, if I were, a professional in a symphony, or I was touring a lot, or I was playing giant gigs every day, I would probably change my strings out pretty often. These I haven't changed in 3 years.
What's pretty often? Every month?
Oh,
every week?
Every 6 months to 7 months.
Okay.
That's pretty often. There are guys who do it like every day. because they'll have different types of strings.
Enjoy that sponsorship.
Yeah, well, yeah, so that's a big one. But also, you have a couple take on and take offs before you've ruined the strings.
Okay.
So they'll have they'll have their solo strings, right? So there's like solo bass where the entire instrument's up a whole step. And that's just how it is. It's to make it sound brighter.
Sure.
It's become less common lately because people are like, just play cello. But and we're like, yeah, it's bass. Like you should go down, not up. You know. So there's been this great movement for that. But yeah, they like you have all your different types of strings: your jazz strings, your hybrid strings, your orchestral strings, your solo orchestral strings. Yeah.
All right.
But yeah, I was just going to talk about the bow, which
Sure.
I use a very weird bow. No, well, not weird for most people, but weird if you're not familiar with a German bow.
I'm totally not.
Yeah, so this is a German bow. You'll see the screw here is very long, and the frog, which is this part, is very wide. And I'm not holding it like this. This is a standard sort of bow hold you'll see for like a violin or a cello or anything like that. I hold it like this. And this is called, it's called the German bow or a Dragonetti bow. Dragonetti was a very famous bass soloist from the 19th century. And he sort of popularized this. This is a variation on a Baroque bow hold, which would be like this, where you actually hold it here. And this is like for a viol da gamba, right? Viol da gambas used strings as frets. They would tie them around the fingerboard to make frets. And so when you have a fret, you can't do this.
The finger vibrato.
Yeah, the sort of string vibrato.
Yeah.
What you would do is you would do the vibrato here. And do it with the bow hair.
Weird.
Super weird. It's awesome. It's harder with this.
I mean, a much
those bows also
tighter
go this way instead of this way.
A much tighter vibrato too.
But yeah, so instead of having to push down on the strings with my arm like this, I actually let the weight of my arm kind of rest against my thumb, and I draw it that way, which is pretty fun. But yeah, and the other thing is, speaking of the difference of electric and upright, on an electric bass, if I were to play something like a chromatic scale on the E string, I would play with my third finger on the third note, fourth finger on the fourth note. So 1, 2, 3, 4. My hand looks pretty uncomfortable.
Yes,
right?
it does.
Like extremely uncomfortable. So on upright, you don't do that. You play 1, 2, 4 for everything. So if I played a chromatic scale like this, shift, 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 shift.
So there's really only 3 hand positions at.
Well, there are 3 fingers you get to play with.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. And until you get to that harmonic, which this would be the 12th fret, you move into thumb position, which is really interesting. So now I'm playing with my thumb, and now I get 1, 2, 3, 4 fingers. I don't use the pinky anymore, but now I use the third finger.
But now you can use, you could use the thumb instead as your first.
Yep. And what's also interesting is instead of having one position that's chromatic, right? So here I can't do that. I have to shift for a whole step.
Right.
So here, chromatic, whole step between the first and second note, and then chromatic, and then, right? I can now
Lean on me.
Re, mi, fa, fa, mi, re, do. Oh yeah, that is step on me. Yeah, or lean on me. Yeah. So yeah, that's pretty fun. That's pretty neat, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's super wild.
Mhm.
I do have a question. So you can't just retune instead of buying solo strings? Asks Mad Mia.
Yeah, there are 2 main reasons for that. One is the tension gets way too high for solo strings. If you retune the instrument up a whole step, it causes the bridge to smash itself into the top plate. You can kind of get away with it, like depending on the type of string. If you're using, say, a spiral core, no way. Those strings have no extra pull. If you're using, and if you use like a Corelli, you're going to snap the string. Those things are so light. The bel canto, maybe it's got a little bit more give. You could probably get away with an obligato, which has a different feel. The strings are like totally different, by the way. Like it's not just like, oh yeah, like I like an Ernie Ball because it's got a little bit of this sound, or it feels that way.
Right.
It's like the strings play completely differently.
Huh.
Like they're huge. People argue about them constantly.
Of course.
Which is super fun. But like
I just paid $300 for these strings. My strings are better.
yeah.
I hate this.
I like the bel
Surprise.
cantos because they sound very good for that sweet. bowed sound, but they also sound great for. Pluck sound.
It's very nice.
Yeah.
If you're just joining us, you've stumbled into Rocksmith Encore a little bit late, but you'll want to go back and watch the whole show because Travis Kindred is talking about bass guitar today, but not really so much bass guitar as actual bass. Although
upright, stand up, acoustic, whatever you want to call
bass
it.
Fiddle. Is that
bass
acceptable
fiddle
as well?
Well, my favorite is when I walk down the street and people are like, "Oh, that's a big violin." And you're like,
it kind of is.
Yeah. Which
Sure
is interesting
is.
because it technically isn't. And that brings me to my favorite point of all time.
Is this the construction?
It has to do with the construction. It also has to do with the tuning.
Okay.
Right? So if this were in the violin family, it wouldn't be tuned like this. It would be tuned like that.
So what are the four notes that are the violin then?
So like
and it's the same as a mandolin, right?
Yes, violin and mandolin are the exact same instrument.
Okay.
The only difference is the mandolin has frets. And it has twice. It doubles the strings for that chorus effect.
Right.
But they're played like exactly the same. Same with like saxophone and flute have the same exact fingerings, but not clarinet. So violin instruments are tuned in fifths, right? So E, and then I go up the scale, major scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have a fifth, root fifth, right?
Yeah.
And now I have to go up another fifth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, root fifth. I have to go another fifth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, root fifth, right? That would be that's how the cello, violin, and viola are all tuned. They're all depending on what note they are, right? Viola and cello start on a C. The violin starts on a G, right? And then they go up from there. And so, but bass is tuned in fourths. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Interesting.
Yeah, right. So what's a bit of a bummer is that it's harder for us to make large leaps, right? Because if you have as an open string, then you want to play this note. It's right here, right? So you don't have it's right there. It's super easy. You want to play that's a big leap for me. If I want to play I want to play a 10th, right? So it's a third up an octave from here. I have to go across 4 strings.
Yeah.
It's a lot. And if I want to play it on a different string, I have to shift quite a bit.
Yeah, you have to go way high.
Yeah. And so the question is, why would you tune it that way? Why would you tune it in fourths rather than in fifths? Well, because it's not a violin instrument. It's a gamba instrument. Viol da gamba is actually the true sort of godparent of the bass. And there are a couple of key things aside from the tuning that give that away. The bow is one, right? The Dragonetti bow is borrowed from the gamba. And also, if you look at the corners of the instrument, which are these here, a violin will have these nice little like kind of rounded corners. Those are called violin corners. These are called gamba corners.
Okay.
Right? And then the last piece, the piece de resistance, is if you look at the back, right? This back has no arch to it. It's perfectly flat, right? And it's called rightly so, a flat back bass.
Okay.
Right? You'll very, 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 very rarely see a cello, viola, or a violin with a flat back. You'll sometimes see it in cellos, and those are usually converted gambas.
Oh.
Yeah. And if you look close, you'll see that they've actually like glued on the violin corners on those cellos, which is super interesting. But yeah, so it borrows all of its construction and its tuning and even its positioning and playability to the gamba family, not from the violin family.
Okay.
Yeah,
which it's a different beast altogether.
Absolutely. If you're interested, you can look up the violone, and they all had frets too, which is cool. But yeah, gamba translates to the knees or the thighs, and so you would hold those instruments between your thighs. They didn't have end pins, which is super interesting.
So you just had to sort of
squeeze
them.
The violin is like I forget the actual Italian name, but it's the violin con bureau or the viol con bureau, and it means of the shoulder.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that's how the two families were differentiated, was by where you played them.
Right.
And the differences were the corners, the arched construction of the back, and the tuning.
All my life I've never known that. I was just like, well, yeah, you just scale up a violin by about 400%, and there you go, you got a bass.
And if you look at a viol da gamba's tuning, it's the exact same as a guitar.
Huh.
Because it's fourth, 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 third, fourth, just like a guitar.
All right.
Yeah, and so the guitar really comes like as part of the da gamba heritage.
So Beatmaster80 says, for you, how was the transition from a bass guitar with frets to a fretless upright?
Right. So that's a great question. That's actually the primary focus of my style of education, right? So as a bass teacher, I focus primarily on teaching upright to electric, right? Like or electric to upright, like electric players who want to learn upright bass.
Okay.
And there are a few things that they have to learn right off the hop. The first thing is how to hold their hand, right? Just like I said, you can't play with 4 fingers. Not a thing. You have to play with 3. And that changes your entire concept of how to play a line, right? Instead of playing, if I played a G major scale here with electric bass fingering, right? That's a pretty standard way of playing this scale. On upright, I have to play it like this. How many shifts is that?
That's a lot.
1, 2, 3. Right? That's a ton of shifting. That's
Right.
4 shifts actually. But
That's a load of shifts.
but it's
It's a
you have to
family
move around a
show.
lot, and right, and then you also have to understand that like the instrument, you have to find that balance of how much pressure to put down, and how much pressure to release. Right. So what that means is you can't just grip the neck and just squeeze the heck out of it because you'll kill your hand.
Right.
Just in seconds, it'll be done. You know, you'll notice it. Just
Come
bam,
back
done.
next week.
Exactly. So you actually have to bring the instrument towards you. So like I don't push down with my fingers like that. I pull back with my shoulder like this.
Interesting.
Yeah. So when I'm playing, you can see that like all of this is
all the
engaging.
tension is in your left arm pulling. I
Right.
never noticed that.
Yeah, you use the larger muscles to do the bulk of the work. You use the smaller muscles to do the articulate work, right? If you want to play something like, you're not going to do that if you're trying to grip it. It's just not
Yeah.
going to work. And then the last thing, of course, is the pits, which is the plucking, right? Now, thankfully here, no pits.
Pits for pizzicato?
Pizzicato, exactly.
there
Yeah,
we go. I
yeah.
learned
That is
something
the truncation. So normal electric bass, right? You kind of go across the strings, roughly perpendicular,
Sure.
right? On upright bass, especially for jazz, you actually use the side of your finger, and this is called the grand pits,
All right.
right? See, I'm actually using a good amount of meat, right, on my finger, and what I'm doing is I'm actually getting a lot more tension out of the string. And what I'm doing here is, since I'm releasing the string at a slight angle, you hear there's no string clatter?
Right. Because it's the correct angle for the curvature of the.
I did a really good job on this.
Yeah, look at you.
It's usually supposed to clatter right there. But
Nope, you've made it perfect.
But yeah, so there's no clatter, and you get that really big
Right.
nice round sound instead of this. When you try to play normal, you get this kind of tinny sound, and it's really hard to stay articulate here. So you use the grand pits, especially for jazz.
If
Nice.
the notes are random, then it must be jazz.
Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah, you want always fun.
That was the best version of "She's Coming Around the Mountain" I've ever heard.
Oh
But,
yeah,
that was,
I wrote that tune. She's Coming Around the Mountain. That's mine. Yeah. So those are the key differences, and then everything from there is just building comfortability.
Right.
It's just
This is all muscle memory, really. I mean, you don't have any frets to help you sort of instantly go, "Oh, I'm in the wrong place." You just not only do you have to hear the note and its purity and get used to that, but also get used to. I mean, how long does that usually take for your students as they transition
depends.
from electric to upright?
If my student has a background in singing, it's usually quite quick.
Okay.
Because there are tricks, right? So first off, it's not just like play an A, and you're like, okay, which one? It's very very much like play the first position A on the G string. So there are positions, right? It's sort of funny because it starts in half position, right? And then it goes into numbers. So you go into first position after that, and second position.
You realize the more you explain about this instrument,
Third
the less it makes sense to me.
Right? Yep. And then and it goes up from there. And then when you get to the thumb, it's thumb position. Pretty
Sure.
clear. But so there are positions there to guide you. It's not you're just off in the reeds. The other thing that's really cool is there are little tricks orally that will help you to recognize where you are. So, for example, if I want to play an E, and I want to make sure I'm playing the right note, I'll play it against the A. See, I was a little sharp.
Yeah.
That fifth is really easy to hear.
Sure.
There it is. So what I do is I find perfect intervals whenever I can, perfect being a fourth or a fifth or an octave. And those are really, really easy to tune. Right? So if I want to play an A on the D string, I'll play the A on the open string as well.
Yeah, it's spot on.
Thanks. Well, the other trick is for this is you put your thumb right where the neck and the heel meet, and then you get your first finger right across from it. There you go. Bob's your uncle.
Bob's your uncle.
Little.
And Robert's your mother's brother, as a friend of mine in England used to say.
That's pretty good.
Yeah,
but yeah, so you have guideposts along the way. You know, like one thing I have my students do, like they play a D major scale. So they're constantly checking against that open note, or something like. Right, checking against the open string. There are all these different methods of tuning up the ear, and then it just becomes, again, muscle memory. In the same way that you can play a really awesome lick on electric bass, but you're not always looking at the fingerboard.
Right. So you mentioned musical theater being a huge influence on you early days in this conversation, and we have two questions.
Awesome.
One from Tufty McTavish. What is music theater? He's not familiar with the phrase.
Oh, okay.
So he may know it, but under a different way. It's a show, I suppose. It's a musical show. So it's a play, but with music.
Yeah. So
I'm not sure what they might call it where Tufty is.
Well, you're probably familiar with opera, right? And you're probably familiar with like a play.
Yeah.
So it's like if you mix the two, right? Opera is like you tell a story on stage in costume through music, right? It's all about like even the interstitial dialogue. Every moment is musically made,
right?
And it's really about the music. The text is important, but the music is there. In musical theater, the thing I really love about it is that the music very rarely gives you exposition. Right? You usually don't get the plot through the music. The music is there to amplify emotionally impactful moments,
right? And
to get you along, and to help make these really amazing stories sort of pop. You know, like a great example is like Wonderful Town, a very rarely played Bernstein musical that follows these two sisters. The famous song is "Why oh why Ohio did I ever leave Ohio?" Or "Why oh why oh did I ever leave Ohio?"
Yeah,
Thank you.
That's the most famous song. I've never heard that.
Oh,
before.
really?
Yeah.
Oh, it's.
And I have a musical theater background too, but not that deep apparently.
There are other songs that are pretty great, but it's a great musical, and it's not about like, oh, you know, I fell in love with the prince and we're living happily ever. It's about these two sisters,
right,
making it in the city. You know, and having their relationships.
I mean, we could name a bunch of musicals that you'd probably know. The Sound of Music is a perfect example.
West Side Story.
West Side Story is a classic
Phantom of the
one.
Opera.
Yeah. And then, of course, modern stuff like Hamilton and Rent. These are also, I mean, a Broadway show is generally shorthand for a musical. Not always, but often. It's the idea of in between, you know, a story that plays out with punctuated by musicals. Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark.
Oh my gosh, I wanted so bad to see that. Every part of me wanted that. But the really interesting thing is someone who breaks the rules is Sondheim.
Yes.
Right? Into the Woods. It's like exposition through music.
Yes.
That is exposition through music, the show.
Yeah.
You know, like the interstitial stuff, almost nothing happens.
So Black Widow 9 wants to know, what is your favorite musical?
Oh, that's a loaded question. So it's actually Into the Woods.
Okay.
It's I've done that show. So it was a show I did in high school on stage. I was the wolf, and then I actually have a background in ballet dancing. So the wolf dies really early on, like in the first halfway through the first act, and it's a 3-hour show.
Right.
And so you're out in the first half hour.
But
so they were like,
doesn't the wolf return?
The wolf generally doubles as Cinderella's prince.
Right.
But when you're in high school, you got too many kids.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Sure.
So someone was Cinderella's prince, and I didn't get to double. So what they did is they were like, well, you have a background in dancing. we're going to make you a fairy dancer. So like Cinderella's birds and all of the set changes were done by these like glitter like strewn dancers. And so it was like me and these 3 like awesome ballet dancers just killing it for all the scene changes. You know, every time they would just do a little bit of a more vampy stuff.
Right.
And then we would come out in these like streamy, glittery like leotards and bird masks and just like do these awesome like choreographed things.
If you have photos of this.
Oh, you know what's great is I got the VHS. Yeah, I just need a VHS, like an actual like VCR.
Right,
So
to be able to
I have
digitize
everything.
it.
I just need a VCR and I can capture it.
Something tells me we could probably get you one of those.
Also, the wolf costume looked like a rabbit. It
Nice.
was great. But yeah, so that's my favorite musical. I've also done it once where it was just piano and electric bass. And I was reading the open score and playing like, all the bassoon parts and all this weird stuff. And that was so much fun. But
Sure.
I've probably done that show like 8 or 9 times. Like I love it so much. And Sondheim's a huge part of my life. But a show I've always wanted to play is Jesus Christ Superstar, which I'm finally going to get to do.
That's amazing because I've done Superstar more than any other musical.
Really?
Yeah, because I was always. I mean, Superstar is one of those things where you need like 1 million people in the crowd.
Oh yeah.
So you get a kid with a burlap sack and sandals, and great kid, you're hired.
Right.
So it used to be a family tradition. My whole family would actually go and do this, and my parents are not like my sister and I were both the musical people. My parents liked music, but they were like, look, we just need bodies. We literally need a mob of 100 people for this story.
Right.
So they would, they sang well enough that they could get by, buried in a chorus.
Right.
So, yeah, absolutely my favorite. And an amazing bass show anyway.
Oh,
like,
gosh,
the bass
yeah.
lines in it
So, like in high school,
it's a beautiful
heard,
rock musical.
I
it really,
Yeah, I heard the we always call it like the Brown album, right? Because it's that
Yeah, yeah.
cover.
Yeah.
Iconic, like brown, like faux leather.
Right.
But the bass playing is just so cool. And I was like, I want to do that.
Yeah.
So we're doing it in like a month, I think. All female cast.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
Yeah, you got to come see it. It's down the street.
All right.
But yeah, and then I think my favorite like classic musical is probably Oklahoma, which I'm also doing this year because that was like so I have the same tessitura, which is like your singing range, as the male lead in Oklahoma. And
It's
so,
Curly?
Yep. And so that was my audition piece for everything I did.
Nice.
Yeah, for years. So I know all those songs really well.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right, so there's really one more question that
Awesome.
several people have asked. Comatose Vessel just says, is Travis willing to play a quick tune on this? Everybody wants to hear you actually play a song on it, but we're not set up to play the game. Although, for the record, if you happen to have an upright bass and you want to put an electric, you have an electric pickup down here.
I have a pickup that actually it connects to the bass wheel.
Right.
And then goes into a little like sort of volume pot that attaches to the tailpiece.
Sure.
And then that's going into a preamp so that this sounds a little bit better.
So you can do that, and again, like if you're an accomplished bassist, then you already know your finger position and where you should be and stuff like that. But do you have anything that you can play as a solo piece?
Actually, I was what am I say? So in college, a lot of people major as like a performance major, and I have a performance degree, but I didn't do it the way most people do. So most people
why am I not surprised?
I know, right? So most people like they get their degrees by performing a lot of solo pieces, right? And they learn a lot of solo music. And for bass, like there's a good amount of solo music. It's usually transcribed from other instruments. But what I did is I did a lot of chamber music, which means small groups,
Right.
And so I was in like a guitar and like classical guitar and bass duet, and we would do Bach fugues. It was so much fun. I did Stravinsky's Soldier's Tale, which if you're not familiar with, it's some really cool music. It's like bass, violin, bassoon, percussion, and trumpet, I think, and clarinet. And it's outrageous. It's so cool. So it's 2 from each family, right? 2 strings, 2 woodwinds, 2 brass. Is it French horn the other one? I forget. Anyway, it's awesome. It's so cool. And the percussion part's insane. The Devil's Dance is crazy. The violin part like kills violinists. It's the violin killer.
That's how we get rid of them.
Yeah. They all have to do Stravinsky. And so I actually kind of got away with doing all these like really hard solo pieces or ensemble pieces. So I don't have like a big solo repertoire, but there's one I like, which is the first movement of the Eccles Violin Sonata, which is transcribed for bass. So I'll play that.
Okay, yes, please do.
Assuming my bass is still in tune.
5, 6, 7. Yeah, I was gonna say we just upgraded the lights, so hopefully the lights won't be as hot, and therefore
the instruments will stay in tune.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's see if this works. Nope, that was wrong.
I was going to call you on that, but
Why am I? Sorry, I'm totally missing it. I'm totally missing the second part. I practiced this. I'm sorry. I'm just totally blanking on it.
That's
That's
all right.
stage right. Nah, sorry. I've totally lost
you
it.
know what?
I'm not gonna,
what you did
force it
right
through.
was really pretty. And I
Sorry.
have more questions for you anyway. As
Professionals get nervous too.
as we wrap up, Viper7491 asks, will it be okay to convert a cello for use as a bass for my 8-year-old son? Can you do that?
Yeah.
Can you take a cello
So-
and make it a mini bass?
So this is actually great. This is a great thing. I knew a guy named Dorian after the mode, not the name.
Not the gray.
Yeah, exactly. And so his thing, he was this.
And this is my brother,
I met
Mixolydian.
him- Exactly. He was 18 and he was a traveling solo bassist, crazy good. And we were always like, hey, how are you so good? You see him at these festivals. He's like, oh, wait, I started playing at 3. We're like, what do you mean you started playing at 3? What?
Yeah, this is.
And so what they did, his parents took a viola, they put an M-pin on, and they tuned it in fourths.
Wow.
So yes, you can take a cello and do that. However, if you're sure that bass is going to work out, I would recommend looking into a quarter or half size bass because they do
make them
Yeah.
that small.
So-
You had mentioned that yours is. I said so. This is a full size bass,
Yeah.
and that became a whole other thing.
Yeah. So the term full size bass is actually a misnomer, as many things about the bass are. There's no true thing as a full size bass, and it's not because there isn't one that's the right size. It's because that doesn't actually mean anything, right? So it usually refers to the string length, right, which is the scale. So for this is a 41 inch. Right, which is pretty big. 41 and a half is about as big as you'll get, right? Longer string length, much larger distances for all the fingers, but it's a big sound. And this is what we call a 7/8. Now, a standard size is a 3/4, right? And then you're getting to the 40 to 39 inch string length. And then a sort of less common but pretty, you see it pretty often is a 5/8. That's what's considered sort of a smaller bass. Totally, it's still you don't need to get different strings. You don't need 5/8 strings. You use normal strings. And the 7/8 you don't need special strings either. You just get normal strings. And those are smaller. They're really easy to play. I love them to death. They don't have the big oomph usually, but they're just butter to play because everything's so close together.
What is the scale on that?
I'm trying to remember. It's 38 to 37. I think. Don't quote me on that.
I'm getting to the point that the electric is a 34-inch scale versus a short scale electric, which is a 30-inch scale. What's the closest acoustic bass to a if somebody was like, I know how to play electric bass, but if I can borrow my friend's half,
right?
Where does it
if
sort
you
of
can play
intersect?
electric bass, you should go right to 3/4.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you'll want a real bass.
It's going to feel larger though.
Yeah, and it should.
Okay.
That's the thing is it shouldn't feel the same.
Okay.
If it does, the problem happens. You start playing it like an electric bass, which causes a lot of other problems. It's not just because it's physically hard to do. It's because it's hard to play in tune. It's hard to play fast, and it can damage your hand. Especially if you're like, oh, I can't wait to pick up that 3/4 now, and you're playing with sort of electric bass technique, you're going to hurt yourself real quick.
Okay.
But so then you're probably going to be looking at a half size bass, which I think is roughly about 36.
Okay.
I don't really remember the scale lengths on half size and quarter size, but a quarter size is a little bit bigger than a cello, and it's usually what you see. They're not common. But you see them a lot for the smaller instruments.
Okay.
Or for younger students.
I was going to say for the smaller players.
Yeah, so you can take a cello. The problem is going to be finding the strings.
Okay.
Because you can't just take cello strings and retune them. It's a whole thing. Oh, hey, check this out. We got a scale length.
Brian Pody has brought up.
So it has a full size. That is definitely 7/8. Like that. It says 4/4. It means 7/8.
Okay.
And then, there's a famous bass called a K bass. It's a type of bass. It's really, really common, slightly different measurements. So a half size would be a 38-inch scale. That's a little large for a half size. And quarter size, 35.4. So a quarter would be just about an electric
Quarter
bass.
would be almost the same size as an electric bass.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. I'm sorry that we can't spend more time talking about this, but we
That's
covered a
okay.
hell of a lot of ground.
I think so. Yeah, that's pretty fun.
Thank you so much for bringing this in. We're going to rename the replay the acoustic bass special because that's really what it is, the upright bass special.
Yeah.
Because, again, I didn't know what we were really going to be talking about.
Yeah, and I thought we were talking about something else too.
Yeah, well, maybe we can on a
Yeah,
future show.
absolutely.
Again, Rocksmith Encore is kind of free form on purpose so that we can sort of change what we want to do at any given time and just sort of answer both questions that you folks may have or questions that we're you know what, we've never talked about this and I really want to do it. So we just sort of let people chase their passions. That's what Rocksmith Encore is about. And thank you for sharing this. Because I didn't know your entire backstory. We got Travis's origin story. So if you didn't hear that, go back, watch the replay. We have plenty of other encores on several other things as well. We've got the anatomy of metal, sort of like the breakdown. What's the difference between death metal, thrash metal, doom metal, speed metal? We actually have a detailed breakdown on that. What do I do to improve my guitar? Pody literally disassembles and reassembles a guitar over 3 different shows and goes into the detail of what stuff you can have done and even gives you instructions if you're brave enough to do it yourself. Just check out our Rocksmith Encore playlist here on Twitch. All of the shows we've ever done are archived chronologically. Some of them do go into each other. Brian McCune talks about the science of sound and the physics of music over 2 different shows that were about a year apart. So, and we are open to your ideas. This came out of somebody simply saying in our regular weekly stream, gee, I'd really like to see Travis do something on bass. And Travis is like, I've been waiting for somebody to say that. So thank you very, very much for all of this.
Yeah, this is fun.
We will actually be back in just 3 days from now. We do our normal weekly stream every week at Thursdays at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, 10 p.m. UTC. That's the same time as we did this one, but it's 3 days from now. And we will be doing a more structured show where we go over the DLC of the week. This week, it's the Cardigans. If you have not heard, we have a 3-pack from the Cardigans. So we'll be playing all 3 of those songs. Plus, we'll throw in an extra song as well, just for funsies, and we'll have more giveaways. Thank you very much to Tawny, to Black Widow 9, for being our mod for this one. Hope you got some freebies. Some of you out there, I saw some of the raffles go. We'll give away more free stuff on Thursday as well. But for now, I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah, it sounds good to me.
On behalf of Travis Kindred and myself, Dan Amrich, thanks for tuning in to Rocksmith Encore. We'd love to hear your ideas for the future, and we'll be back on Thursday. Join us here on Twitch. Bye, everybody.